concluding things, and then we will head downstairs. So Mark Brimhall-Vargas, Dr. Mark Brimhall-Vargas, is the Deputy Chief Diversity Officer of the University of Maryland. He's devoted his career to diversity management, inclusive climate, cultural competency programming, and through this has helped to make this campus a place where innovative ideas and programs related to diversity and inclusion are not only encouraged, they're nurtured. And through this, through his work here, Mark has been a great friend to the programs we've created at the iSchool. And he's going to just remind us that we aren't alone on thinking about these issues, and what our field is working through is part of a bigger picture of thinking about diversity and inclusion within education.
So, good afternoon, everybody. So I want to show you what I brought. Right? That is not going to happen. So, I will say that part of this is actually 18-point font because I'm now at that age where I have to have it that way. So first of all, I want to congratulate IPAC for raising the kinds of topics that you're raising here. I think it's very important, and it's certainly exactly as you suggest, Dr. Yeager, that in fact diversity issues, I think, really start here. Like, you are my heroes in many ways because of the things that I know about my own history. I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico. My mother came from Peru, and she was the single head of household for my family. We spoke Spanish at home. And in Albuquerque, my best friend for many, many years was a guy named John Werner. He's now a faculty member in Florida. We went to mid school together, we went to high school together. There were so many classes that we had together. But his experience and mine were very different. And what I mean by that is I'll give you a hint about one of the things that happened when we graduated from high school. When we graduated from high school, we had our high school graduation party together. And his parents had very different means than my mother. My mother was a department secretary at the University of New Mexico. Right? He received a computer for his graduation present. And I received a typewriter. An electric typewriter, but it was a typewriter. And I remember in that moment realizing, even though we went to the same high school, we literally lived in the same neighborhood, my destiny and his had very different preparation, right? So why is that important? Well, because I think about what is the current analogy of someone who gets a computer after high school, or someone who gets a typewriter, an electric one, or someone who doesn't get that at all, right? So I recognize what I had, but I also recognize that we have very different experiences. So I raise this, and so I will move through this quickly because I know that there are some things. So why do diversity? Well, there are several reasons that I think are important. There's the obvious one, which is it's the right thing to do. I think many of you are here Friday at 5 o'clock talking about diversity because there's a part of you that knows it's the right thing to do. You're here because it's the right thing to do. There's a bottom line argument around it. It's about adaptation. Business communities have figured this out. They know that if we aren't diverse as business communities, we won't survive. We don't cater to who's there, we won't make it in the marketplace. There is another argument, though, and it's really a part that what we hear about and talk about in higher education generally, which is the excellence reason. That we know when we are put together in diverse teams, we know that when we put our students together across difference in school settings, in classrooms, in work projects, they do better. They develop smarter, more creative ideas than homogeneous teams. One of the things that we also know, however, is that heterogeneous groups actually are slower. We do know that for a fact. Homogeneous groups will make decisions faster, but they're not always the right decisions. So why do I hold librarians in such esteem? Well, it's connected to that excellence argument, right? For me, I see libraries, information, technology, all the things that are provided, the direct service that you were talking about in terms of resumes and bringing people in just so that they have access to particular pieces of information that aren't necessarily available anywhere else. right? In many ways, I see the libraries as where the rubber hits the road in terms of issues of diversity. So what do you provide that I see as crucial? Well, one is we know that particularly public education is under-resourced. You know, we know teachers are the lowest paid professionals in the United States and have been for a very, very long time. We don't see that changing. The amount of resources dedicated to public education is constantly an issue. And that's also true for public higher education. Even here at the University of Maryland, we're very fortunate that we're attempting to address some of the financial realities that we have, but the reality is that the state is always decreasing the amount of support of the institution. That's the reality. So what's the impact of that? Well, it means that for the very communities that I came from, remember, an electric typewriter, right? The kind of textbooks I had available to me were less than optimal, let's just put it that way. And the teachers that I had knew that. And they knew that in order to provide me a good education, they needed to have alternative curricula. There needed to be something else available. And if I didn't have access through a library, I wouldn't have it at all, right? So we know that libraries, public libraries, support public education, right? That they have this type of relationship of providing services to the most needy of communities. I also think it's important, this is the triangulation of information argument that I have, why libraries are so important. Just because I grew up in a particular community, and I in fact grew up, I'm not Mexican American, my family is again from Peru, but we were honorary Mexicans in our community. I knew little to nothing about Peru or Mexico. But where did I get that information? Well, that was something that I had provided in local library systems, right? I was able to learn about my community in a way that added and complemented to the kinds of narratives that I heard at home. So I think that's critical. We actually are providing another source of information about ourselves. And we are then able to recontribute into that body of knowledge. That we can then, this is the Web 2.0 world now, right? You can actually say something back to the literatures that you're reading. So I think that's very important. And I think one of the biggest, who was the person who said, that we go to libraries as a domain of truth? Who said it? Was that Fiona? Yeah. Fiona said that. Our society has begun to develop what I think of as a very troubling relationship with information. Public discourse has been increasingly become very sort of facts optional. And that's an understatement. That to me is very serious. And if we think about libraries as some of the last places where you can go for unbiased, credible, facts-driven, evidence-based information, I mean, you're holding an anchor. And in many ways, I think of librarians as sort of the moral compass of information, right? So you have a sacred duty that I think is intricately connected to issues of diversity and access. But I offer my word of caution. So I don't know how many of you, like me, are Star Wars fans. Anybody a Star Wars fan? Okay, excellent, my people. So for those of you Star Wars fans, there was part of one of the movies where they were attempting to solve the mystery of a missing planet, and they had gone to the Jedi library. I don't know if you remember that moment in the movie where the lovely stereotypical image of our librarian, this older white woman, said, "If it isn't in the library, it does not exist." Right? And that always gets a laugh in the movie theater, right? We know that that's not true. We know that libraries are places where people have made decisions about what actually counts as knowledge. And so I think that's a word of caution for ourselves. What is our own level of preparation? What are our own stories? Our own beliefs and ideas about what counts as knowledge and who gets to produce it? What forms does it take? We think about publication as a legitimate form, but what if that isn't available to particular communities, especially if they have subjugated knowledges? What other forms of materials might exist in a library in the days of infotainment, right? So I offer that as something to reflect about. So I will skip all this other stuff and go to the end, because I know it's 5 o'clock. I want to offer you something which, as a diversity practitioner myself, and I like to use the word worker, a diversity worker, right? Let's be real about what we do. We work on diversity. There are times where I feel deflated about our successes. Sometimes aren't as great as we would hope, and sometimes it's even worse. I mean, my colleague from South Carolina is saying, let's not always dwell on the stuff that's bad, because there's a lot of bad stuff. I take heart in the words of Thurgood Marshall. When he was asked about why he did civil rights work, he said, and I'm going to read his quote because I don't want to misquote it. He said, "As bad as it is, imagine how much worse it would be if we offered no resistance at all." Right? Think about that. You are providing basic information, basic access to our democracy, right? Electric typewriter, right? Well, that version today is what happens if you aren't able to participate in what many people are calling the new democracy, Twitter, right? Your 144 characters of you being able to voice, right? Well, there's a cost to that, right? If you don't have access to this particular medium, to the access to AT&T, Verizon, the phone, the computer, you're not able to participate in this new democracy. So how do we resist that? And I also would offer one more thing, again from Thurgood Marshall. I really love Thurgood Marshall. After years of serving under Chief Justice Earl Warren, where he was often in the majority at that time, Earl Warren was replaced by Chief Justice Warren Burger, who was a Nixon appointee. And Warren Burger was expected to be the person who undid all of the Warren-era gains. What ended up happening is, in fact, not that. We know from history that those gains were not really undone under the Burger court. And I like to think that it might be something about the relationship with Thurgood Marshall. You see, Thurgood Marshall had this particular way of greeting Chief Justice Burger. And he would say, greeting Chief Justice Burger, "What's shakin', Chiefy baby?" I think that's important. I think it's a testament of his ability to advocate, but also build relationships when he's speaking truth to power. And so I think that that's an insightful moment for us. You know, who in your life is someone that you can say, "Chiefy baby"? So I want to congratulate IPAC and all of you here, certainly the steadfast ones at 505 for this amazing conference, and remind you that we stand in this work together. You're doing sacred work, and I commend you for it. Thank you.